let's talk about fair pay and pay transparency. So I did a poll the other day, which is really cool. And I just asked the question, what's your view on salary transparency? And so should be mandatory, personal choice, or harmful. Interestingly, 61% of people so far, there's 2 days left, have voted that pay transparency should be mandatory, which I think is interesting. And it brings up a whole raft of things, right? Because, and we'll talk about them. It's good. Transparency is good. It can lead to fair, open, all of those things, but it can also lead to unfair comparisons, internal competition. I think the classic is often you've been in the job for quite a long time and very likely to be underpaid, and they're advertising a role at the same level as you, and you have to put your pay range in the US on the job ad, and you see that the minimum salary is way above what you're earning. So I think that's interesting. What do you think, Jamie?
I think of it as a paradox because I think all of those things are true at the same time, right? It's something that it sounds like the majority feel should be mandatory. It also feels like it could lead to more transparency, which people can be uncomfortable with. But I think discomfort is something that we need to move through in order to, kind of get to the place that I think this is trying to get to, which is having more equitable pay. And, you bring up a really good point. And I think, recruiting should always be, feeding information to their compensation partners, to their HR partners. Recruiting should never feel like an outlier, that's just trying to break the bank to bring in talent. We're really just harbingers of the market. And that data is important. And it should be useful to organizations for them to understand, what top talent looks like, how to retain, top skills. So instead of something that, it will always create tension, but I think the tension is healthy. It also gives organizations the opportunity to, look at their internal pay structure and make sure that, the pay is comparable to the market that the next set of skills is coming from. So, and I can give an example of what I mean by that, which is a lot of times, especially in large organizations, in particular here in the US, you find kind of your comparable pay markets, and then you work across that as your guardrails. But oftentimes, transformative business leaders are looking to unique, companies and industries that typically maybe haven't been part of that compensation modeling, to bring in new talent, to bring in exciting different skills. And I think that's information that's important for organizations to understand. And at least it gives a talk track, to talk to internal employees and gives them an opportunity to see maybe where some of the higher paying skill sets are coming from. So I think, again, instead of creating conflict, it's an opportunity for everyone to come together and really put together a more holistic picture.
Yeah, true. There's so many things in that. I think it's interesting. Like when I started recruiting, I always found in London that typically people that had not got UK experience, so immigrants that just come into the UK, always got paid less, by and large. And the excuse was, well, they haven't got London experience and stuff. So, which is not right, in my opinion. And so I think, and here we don't have this yet. It is coming in. There's an EU pay directive. Not that the UK is part of the EU, but I'm sure we'll follow. We'll certainly join it. Not the EU, because we've just come out, but the pay directive. But we don't have it here. So it's interesting to look at the US because you're a little bit further ahead, let's say, on this. Because here, generally in Europe, when you're recruiting, people share what salary they're on. So it's shared. So, what are you earning? It's a classic question from recruiters or HR or hiring managers or whatever. And typically, 90% of people will share. Some people are not comfortable sharing. When someone says that, it's interesting. The hiring manager will always be like, well, what are they hiding? It's quite interesting. And I know compared to the US, it's illegal to ask people what they're currently earning. So actually, I think for me, a job pays what a job pays. And I think it's a good thing if a company says, look, this job is paying X or between X and Y if they want to go for a range. And we don't mind if you're earning more than that right now. It doesn't matter if you're earning less, because it can work both ways, right? Always, there's a lot of people that get nervous hiring people in who've been earning a lot more because they think that, oh, hold on, they're going to leave for a bigger job or you know what I mean? And then it also works the other way, because sometimes when you find out what someone's earning and it's a lot less than you think, you start getting all of these kind of biases in your head about, well, hold on a second, you know. So here, when someone finds out that someone's earning a certain amount, mentally you find it's rare that people will get like an increase of much more than, say, 15% or something. Like, mentally, hiring managers find it very difficult too. So you run into all of these kind of issues. I think it's quite interesting. And then kind of around that, I do think that us humans really like to negotiate either way. You know, so there's still some negotiation there, isn't there? Even though, you know, you don't know what people are earning, but they might, I don't know, they might tell you, but generally you just can't ask, can you, in the US?
No, you can't ask for historical pay information, at least from a base salary perspective. And it's interesting when that came out a few years ago, you know, the immediate reaction was like, how are we going to do our jobs? That's what we do. We find out what people make. And I think we've done an extraordinary job of working through that question and really gauging what we should be doing, which is like going forward, you know, opportunistically for different opportunities to take into account, you know, what the role entails. Is it bigger scope of responsibility to really ask for what you would like to be making? I think that's more realistic. And I think it also gives a different, you know, edge both to candidates and to companies. In terms of actual pay transparency, you know, there's a few things that you said that I think, you know, are shifting and changing, especially here in the US. One is some companies don't allow hiring managers to be part of the conversation directly. You know, they're getting some information, but maybe not all of the information, because it can create that tension within teams. It can create tension within managers who potentially might be earning less than someone they're looking to bring in. And really what you're looking for is skill set. And we're looking for transformative skill sets most of the time. And transformative skill sets, it's kind of the, you know, rising tide lifts all ships. And so I think progressive managers really want to be able to bring in the best possible talent that they can get. But there's always, you know, a tripod, if not four people involved in salary negotiations, right? It's the candidate, it's the recruiter, it's HR separately from the recruiter, it's the compensation team. And everyone, I always say it's like, it's one beach ball, but we all have a different color. And so my color might be blue, compensations might be red, a hiring man, you know, and you can just think about the fact that we're all holding the same ball, but we're looking at it from a different, you know, vantage point. And that usually, I think, evens out the right, you know, compensation structure, because everyone's taking into account different things and different needs. And the other thing I would say is that I think, you know, there's a big part of variable pay, especially when you look at tech and different, you know, compensation structures, right? Base salary is only one component. You also have, you know, target bonus, you have, you know, stock or options. So there's a tremendously wide, there's a wide variable in terms of overall compensation, even from year to year with the same person. And so I think performance-based pay is probably going to become more of the norm and less structured base pay. And I don't think that they do it anymore, but I know Amazon years ago, you know, it gave everyone the same base pay. And so we might see a little bit more of that, which is here's the range for this level. But then there's always variable compensation based on performance.
Yeah, true. And also, of course, like, I mean, so generally that is true in large listed companies, but also there's an awful lot of folks, maybe even half, that want to work in SMEs. And so then it even gets a little bit more interesting, doesn't it? Because again, we've talked about it quite a lot, is that pay is one thing, one component, but also there's, you know, we talk about energy, we talk about time, enjoyment, happiness, people wanting to take less money for more time, more energy. So there's quite a lot that goes into it, isn't there? And I think also the other thing is, if you're hiring or you're running a company, you know, it's quite easy just to get quite, say, carried away, but just, you know, I think you have to just decide, well, this is how much I can afford to pay, because, you know, budgets aren't unlimited, and you might be in, you know, just whatever kind of position your company's in, you have to take a view as, do you know what, this is what I can afford to pay, which is fine. It might be above, below whatever, right? I mean, that's what you feel that you can pay for that job, and then you know, and that and for me that's fair. And as long as you're transparent and you're paying other people doing the same job, if there are other people doing the same job, the same, then I think that's a like a legitimate position to take, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's a really great point. And, you know, we have to think about our value proposition. You know, any organization should be thinking about holistically, you know, what is the value proposition for someone to come join my organization? Is it acceleration of, you know, personal finance? Then, you know, someone might make a different decision, different choice. If someone is looking for, you know, time, energy, and what do you normally say? Remuneration.
Remuneration, we say remuneration, yeah. I think or pay. We love remuneration.
uh,
It just sounds good, doesn't it? Remuneration.
Yeah, it sounds great. I don't even think I said it correctly. In my mind, I'm saying it right, and then when it came out, I'm not sure it did. You know, I have said this for, you know, I will say I've been in recruiting now for 20 years. It'll be 20 years this October, which is a huge milestone for me. So I've seen a lot of change, but the thing that hasn't really changed is that, you know, people are always looking for different things at different points in their life, right? And, you know, ultimately someone coming into an organization, because we're really talking about someone walking into an organization, there is a lot of opportunity for people to be, you know, the whole point is transparency, more open, more honest about what that compensation could look like. But ultimately, when you get into an organization, you're on a different track, right? Because you're going to be paid for performance. You're going to be, you know, there's bonuses. There's different
Yeah,
sliding scale in terms of how your performance is evaluated. And I don't think that we can like turn the clock back on that. I think that's going to become more the case, and I
yeah,
think SMEs will follow. Right? You always want to pay. Not only, you know, I would say you want to be playing top of market if there's other things in your organization that aren't quite as, you know, attractive, like you're going to be working all the time, you know, so you have to look at that scale. And I think that's part of recruiting's job is really to help organizations also not overpay, right? You want to
yes,
make sure that you're paying for the work, you're paying for time, you're paying for retention, you're paying for engagement. And
yeah,
so that shouldn't stop when someone comes in the door. It really should be something that we're looking after all the time. And again, recruiting's job, I think, is to look out into the market and feed back to their compensation HR partners what's happening, so that no one feels left behind.
definitely,
Ultimately, when you know pay skyrockets in some
definitely.
areas and doesn't skyrocket for internal
No,
employees.
it's true. On that, I want to advocate for the internal employee, the one that is loyal, the one that's been there for maybe 10, 15 years, the one that's probably only got um, salary increases in line with inflation, the one that's probably earning way less than they should, and definitely way less than they would have done if they'd have moved every couple of years. Because I
Yeah.
think you get penalized generally for loyalty in terms of pay.
I mean, look, I
You
think that yes, and I
know?
would
So, God,
say look at the, you know, one of the things I really love looking at is the long-term pay structure, right? So you could see someone that maybe takes a 20% leap for their next role and potentially is also taking a risk, right? They're risking
yeah,
downsizing, they're risking redundancy, they're risking a company being sold. And I think it's just appetite for risk. And so I think if you look at the long haul of a career, you know, some people are going to be rewarded for taking those risks. I think the people that stay are going to be rewarded for with promotion. They're going to be rewarded by maybe they aren't part of a wave of downsizing. Maybe they are going to be rewarded in other ways. Maybe they've worked, you know, in those 10, 15 years, a lifestyle that works for them because they know the organization so well, they're
yeah,
valued for their institutional knowledge. So I think, you know, I don't know if it's being punished, but I think that there's a risk and reward system for different types of employees and different risk,
true.
you know, risk taking.
I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit here. I spoke
Please.
to a friend of mine who is a CFO, and he hired some folks. They came in. He published his pay range and everything, and then two or three of the team came and said, "Hold on a sec. We've been here 5, 10 years, and we're being paid under what you advertised, and it's the same job, and it's not fair." So I think to your point, if you move, there's risk involved, and maybe you should be compensated for that risk by higher pay. Flip side of that is these folks are saying same job, fair pay means equal pay for the same job. And so that was their argument. And so the CFO was like, oh my God, what do I do? You know, on the one hand, like he really liked these folks and he could see their point. And I think mentally though, it was very difficult for him, and I think for others, to give people, it was quite a big pay increase to bring them up to par for people that they had to pay to bring in, because they had to pay a premium. Often you have to pay a premium, don't you, to bring in people externally. So it just ends up bringing up the whole wage thing, and he found it very difficult to get his head around. It's like, what is fair?
Yeah. I think we're also talking about similar things, but not exactly the same.
Go on.
Which is, I think bringing in someone externally, especially from a base salary, because again, I'm thinking of base salary being at par, and then there's also different performance-driven incentives, right?
100%. I think base. I think when people say fair pay, I think it's probably paid for what you're worth, which means similar to your peers, if not the same, on the base. And then obviously, depending on how you do, then there's a variable part. So if you get rated A, I get rated C, you should get more bonus than me.
There's no question. I mean, I think if there's a structure in place and someone internally isn't being compensated at the premium that someone being brought in, there should be a discussion. And I do think ultimately, most of the time, especially if they're high performing individuals, they should be compensated fairly. That is the information, loop that should work from recruiting into HR into compensation. And again, that's saying, what is the premium skill set? From where are we hiring? Why are we now raising the bar for compensation? It shouldn't just be to bring in, and this is another thing entirely, which it shouldn't just be to bring in skill sets. It should be because that's the level of the job that we're expecting. And then I do think there should be absolute harmonization for compensation for internal talent. I also think internally, if you've been in role for 10 plus years and you are looking for that next, wave of salary increase, that's the risk of going then and looking externally. So I think those are two different things entirely, but they go to the same mindset, which is there are people out there that are breaking compensation barriers because they're doing transformative things. And I've always been an advocate for paying the top of someone's personal market if they're going to do something extraordinary for your business. And again, transparency of pay is a little bit challenging right now because we have to look at that and say, is everyone's performance equal? So I think that is going to drive more creative compensation practices. It should remain transparent. People should understand if you are rated highly, if you're performing highly, this is the scale in which you can be potentially paid. And it does, again, drive more transparency. I think that the reality here is we just need more transparency in the conversation of where people are being compensated. It shouldn't be, it shouldn't be that confusing for people to understand how to get to the next level.
Yeah, people want to know, if I need to do this, I can earn this. And if I do this, I earn this. And absolutely. And also, like, the market dictates a little bit on base, generally, right? Like, you kind of know roughly, depending on your level, where you should be. There's so much available information online now that as an individual and as a hiring manager, you should be able to find out. You know broadly where you're at, I think. So, yeah, no, that's interesting. That is very interesting. Any other thoughts on where they should pay transparency, where it should go? Are you comfortable with it like how it is in the US?
I'm getting to a level of comfort. I think back to when we were, no longer able to ask people's compensation. And I remember at the time thinking, well, how are we going to move forward? And it was pretty easy to do that. And so I think like all change, it's hard at first. It starts with policy. And then, in practice, you have to develop certain things that work for you and for your organization. But I do think it's the right thing. I do think we need more transparency, not less. But I do think we're also going to get into, like anything, different, once you fix something, you break something somewhere else. So are we going to get into more pay transparency in terms of publishing what people are making from a performance perspective. So if, and then how do you, and that's the big question, right? Like, it's very subjective for performance reviews. Like, how do you say if Jamie and Lewis are doing the same job? I want to understand the rubric in which they're evaluated, and I want to understand why Lewis is earning X and I'm earning Y. So I think we're getting into that. That wave could be a little bit, if that happens, that could be a little bit more complicated.
I think so. Because, we talked about this the other day. I mean, a lot, certainly in the kind of here in the UK, amongst my social circle, everyone really talks about how much money they make. Like, it's just not really, it's not British, let's say, to talk about. Although I think the younger generation, I mean, it's the dining room. It's like the topic I've heard around the dining table. Like, people are saying what they're earning and things like that. So I think that's interesting. So maybe as the generations go through, maybe there's more open conversation about it. I don't know. I definitely do think on the other side, and I've heard this quite a bit. If you're the person that's earning under, it's annoying, really annoying, and especially if you think, hold on, I'm way better than them. Why are they getting more money than me? I understand. It is. I want to
understand. I think I'm way better. Where's my data? Show me the data. And I think that's where even SMEs and smaller companies are going to step up and really understand this is how compensation works. And, understanding holistically what compensation really means. Part of it is base, bonus, stock. And then there's other types of compensation, right? And then you get into executive pay, right? There's vacation time. There's different benefits that, have a numeric value to them. And so I think we're just, at a very, very, we're at the very beginning of what transparency is, if we're talking it just about base salary. There's, different gates, I think, for compensation that all organizations have always used to pay, pay their top performers. And by the way, it's not to say, I mean, I've worked in organizations where everyone's a great performer. And so, the stack ranking is a little bit intimidating, but, if you're really curious about why you're not being paid as much as somebody else, I think you have choices. I think you go to if you're in a small company, go to your CFO, go to HR, understand, dig in. Is it institutional? Is it performance driven? Is it ultimately that your industry isn't ever going to pay what you think you're worth? And then you do have to take that step outside and get that experience and bring it back. And so, I think that there's a number of options for people, but the one option I don't think is realistic is to wonder. Wondering is not a strategy. You have no answers if you don't ask and you don't understand.
Wondering is not a strategy, 100%. And you can find out, you can educate yourself on the market. Like, you should know what you're worth in the market broadly nowadays. There's so many tools available to you.
Yeah.
And then I think to your point, I mean, depending on size, industry, where these firms are in their cycle, just kind of where they're at, again, will dictate what they can and can't do. But most firms have different levers that they can pull, and money is important, and one of them, and there's other things that might be important to people as well. But I think for me, the riding factor is that as long as you as an individual feel that you're being paid fairly for the job that you're doing, and you kind of know what success looks like, and if your pay's linked to that, great. And the company,
we've been talking about pay. Like, we actually started the conversation, I think, with the question of like people talking to each other about what they're earning and how that could create we call it
so it's interesting. So on that then, so when we say, I mean, maybe again, like me, right, maybe the terminology means also a few different things. So it's fair pay and pay transparency. So pay transparency could mean we work in the same team and we all know what we're getting paid.
Yeah. But I do think the practice of organizations holding them to a standard where they don't necessarily vacillate so differently. If they're hiring for the same role and the same person is expected to perform in that role, I do think that the ranges should be very clear. We're also talking about pay transparency, telling people now exactly what the role is going to pay before we get to the end of the road. And I think in the past, it's felt like this like black box between recruiter and candidate. So now I think it's holding organizations more accountable. And I think that's fair for candidates. That being said, I've always operated that, if it's the right role, usually you're not too far apart, right? These organizations, most of them are pretty sophisticated in terms of how they're structuring compensation. So I think it's just to I hope makes candidates feel like they are being paid fairly and being paid, in the right range as their colleagues.
We say that while you're saying that, I'm just looking at, I just jumped on Netflix's website, not to embarrass them. Let me see because a lot of them are, and then Netflix aren't the only one, but the pay ranges they put on their job descriptions are like, like 50,000 to, let's see if it's here. Oh, okay, I can't find it. But it's like super wide. It's like this role pays 50 to 300.
That's probably Netflix culture, right? I think Netflix has a culture of paying for the talent that comes to them. And, if you want to get the best talent, you try to understand what their needs are and you try to meet that. Other organizations, they create a midpoint and they want to stay, somewhere there. And those are, more traditional ways of hiring. But, if you look at tech in the last 5 to 8 years, there's a reason why they were able to accelerate as quickly as they have. And part of it is being more flexible and creative in terms of, paying for someone's, top of someone's personal market, meaning whatever you were making or whatever you're looking to make, we can match or exceed that because we want the talent to accelerate the business. It's a very, very different compensation mindset, in my experience, than more traditional companies.
And then do you not think then that you will have disparity then? Because guys tend to be a bit better, don't they? Like
you might not have pay parity, but you're having pay transparency.
Even if it's so wide, do you think? Like, does it still leave it a little bit open to the individual's ability to negotiate a good salary for themselves?
Well, this goes back to like the policy is written by, they're not in HR. People that make policy are not recruiters. They're not, they're policymakers, right? It's up to individual organizations to create to personalize the policy and comply with it in the way that works for them. I don't know if Netflix, you should probably look into that. I don't know, if maybe they are in compliance and they're saying we're being transparent. This is how we pay. If you come to us and you want to make X and we think that that's the skill set we're looking for, then we're willing to move in that direction. Again, I'm speaking from the experience of not knowing. I haven't seen Netflix.
No, that's fine. What they've done, to Netflix, and there's a few others as well, so I don't want to just single out them. But what some of these larger firms have ended up doing is saying, do you know what? We'll put a wide range on. And if the thing with the reason for putting a wide range on is essentially avoiding, I would say, the rules of publishing a pay range on a job description. Because when you go really wide, suddenly it doesn't really matter. Like you apply for the job, I can decide whatever I want to pay you, or offer you whatever. So it just gives companies like a bit more leeway to offer what they feel the person's worth, or offer more. Because again, the other thing is, if you're competing for talent, you want to be able to offer what you want to offer to get them, I think. Yeah. So I don't know. I think I've seen that quite a bit. I know.
Listen, it's transparent. It tells you a lot. It tells you a lot about how the organizations think about talent.
That's true.
Again, the policy is the policy. It's written in a certain way, and then I think it's up to organizations to implement the policy, and then ultimately it's up for people in courts to uphold the policy or to say it's correct, or this isn't actually what we had in mind. And it's interesting. Maybe it's more like the U.S. It kind of goes into that judicial system, right? Like we have this executive order, we have this, and then we legislate it, and then we hold people accountable to it. And ultimately, like I think all things do, like it kind of comes out in the wash, right? And something will land where people think that, it is fair. You at least get a sense of there. transparently, someone, one of your peers may be making a tremendous amount more than you, and then it gives you decisions, right? Do you have the conversation? Do you hold the company accountable? Do you legislate against it, or do you leave and find something more,
Yeah.
more equitable?
Yeah. And then we maybe that kind of also then leads on to like the fairness conversation, because if you as an individual feel that's fair, great. If you don't feel it's fair, then you get unhappy, you get resentful, and you'll choose to leave.
I disliked at first the implementation of the policy about not asking what people made. And once I had it in action, I loved it because it gave historically underpaid people a tremendous leg up in terms of
Yeah.
giving themselves an opportunity to make what they think that they deserve. And there is ample evidence, right, that historically underpaid people will continue to be historically underpaid if people just think that there's a formula, to give someone more than they were making. So I've actually loved seeing that policy in practice because I do think it ultimately did what it was intended to do. But as recruiters, it took us some time to learn the language, to work with legal, to understand what we could and couldn't ask for.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think that, we're talking about fair pay and pay transparency, maybe two sides of a different coin is not even a saying. I think
two sides of the same coin. I mean, it's linked. It's linked. I think also just worth mentioning that if it's, if you're working in a board role in a listed company, your total compensation is published publicly.
Absolutely. So, and you can still understand, like if someone has, if someone's mentioned that they have, outstanding remuneration, and they can provide evidence of that. I mean, you certainly don't want to create a false market. And I think we have to make sure that we understand the law, we understand what, is being asked of us. So it goes hand in hand, right? If a candidate can then create a personal market for themselves, it makes sense that companies can create a guardrail to say that's outside of our band. Transparently, we're publishing it. I think it brings everyone back to the center a little bit more.
Yes, that's true. Love that.